Hey there, welcome back to the after dinner party. Yo, what's going on? Hey, thank you so much for tuning in. All those watching this on the replay, all the replay gang, go ahead and type in the comments below, replay gang. Hey, this is a short series I'm doing on live stream only. I just finished my season 5 on Bible Theory podcast, talking about Presbyterianism, all the ins and outs of that. So that took like 3.5 months to actually accomplish. And that was a lot of work. That was the first time in my podcast career where I felt truly exhausted and spent out. And I was like, geez, like I need a vacation from my podcast. But I'm not quite there yet. I'm almost at 500 subscribers, about 20 away. So go ahead and tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend. And with us today, I do have a special guest, Douglas Bond. Let me bring him on. Mr. Bond, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, my friend, for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We are live and direct with the masses. How's the weather down there on your side of town?
It's really quite good. We had about upper 70s today, deep blue sky, a little breeze.
Nice.
Just gorgeous.
That's exactly what we felt today. This past couple of days, it's been raining, foggy, and the steep drop in temperatures out here in the Rocky Mountains. But we got a nice break. Summer feels like it has the last few days in it.
Last hoo-ha, yeah, did it. It's nice. Yeah.
So if you watch some of my episodes, if many of you guys know my episodes, I chop it up. I do interviews. Well, in this after dinner series, I'm just gonna have fellowship. I'm not gonna do interview style. I'm not gonna run the show like that. But for those who don't know you, Doug, why don't you go ahead and, tell us who you are and what you do for those who don't know.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm Douglas Bond, and I happen to manage somehow about almost 24 years ago, I guess 24 years ago, to write my first book. And I thought I wouldn't have any more words in me, and you like it's a zero-sum game. You get a bucket and you get so many words, and once you use them up, they're gone. It doesn't work that way at all. And lo and behold, I kept writing and writing for various publishers, both here in the U.S. and in the U.K., and ended up I think it's my 31st just released about 2 weeks ago, and then I've got a 32nd and a 33rd coming with co-authored with Joel Beakey, my good friend, on Evangelical Heroes. I write a lot about church history. I'm a big fan of church history, and I lead tours in the locations where my books, where I got ideas for my books and where the heroes in my stories were from. So I just led a tour in June that was from Rome to Geneva, and then I did another one in the spring that was Rome to Venice, and then I do Oxford Creative Writing Masterclass. I teach twice a year in Oxford, and so I just came back from there in early July, and then previously in April. But so now I'm planning again for spring and summer. Those are my busy tour times and speaking times and all. And then right now I'm writing books. I've got I was finishing the preface on one. I write the preface after I've written the book, and today and more in the cooker. It's sort of a disease, I guess. I don't know. Can't stop.
Yeah, that sounds like a good disease to have. You can't stop writing. It's the lifestyle that many people dream of. Travel the world, be a teacher, be an author.
Yeah, I taught in the classroom for a number of years as an English and history teacher in a classical Christian high school, many years, and it was in the course of doing that I began writing, and one thing led to another. And since 2015, I've been writing, speaking, and leading tours. So that's kind of my. Oh, and I edit for publishers and writers as well. I copy edit for them, and so that's also kind of a side gig that happens along the way and keeps me sharp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, man, writing like over 30 books, that sounds like a pretty big deal. Oh, look, he dropped off. All right, so obviously there's technical difficulties, but we're gonna go ahead and bring him back on. Don't you worry. Anyways, so yeah, I got Douglas Bond with me, author and teacher. He was talking about his lifestyle. What an amazing lifestyle. He's gonna jump on here in a second. There he is. Hey, you're back. I can't
Yeah.
hear you. Oh,
You
can
can
you
see
hear
me.
me?
I can't see you. I can't see you right now, but I can hear you. So
Oh, okay. Well, you maybe on the settings on your phone, you could probably you could probably fix that to see me. But yeah, I was just trying to catch up. Yeah, so 30
yeah, yeah.
books, 30 books. It sounds like a lot. Like books you have written. Like if any of you just go online, on Google and just type in Douglas Bond books, there's probably like a nice page pops up, and I don't know if all 30 books show up in the same page, but there's a bunch of books that show up for sure. There's
Yep.
Duncan's War, King's Arrow, Rebel's Keep. You wrote one for Ligonier, The Mighty Weakness of John Knox, Isaac Watts, War in the Wasteland, The Thunderer. I have that on audiobook, by the way. Some of these I actually have,
That all
and
sounds.
I haven't read them to my kids yet because they're not quite there yet. But maybe by next summer they'll definitely be right there. Um, so
Yeah.
so tell us about your books
Well,
here.
I have some children. Yeah, well, I have some children's picture books too, so I kind of cover all the range too. The
Yeah,
most recent release is called God's Servant Ruth, and it's a picture book in verse based on Ruth's life. So it's for reading aloud to younger kids and stuff. And that's the second one in that series. God's Servant Job came out before that a couple of years ago.
yes, it says God's
Yeah.
Servant Job, and that's produced by Ligonier or Reformation Heritage. He got froze. He got frozen in that one. Oof.
Oh.
There he is. Sorry, you keep breaking up. So what I usually want, I help people is that when the people come on, it's better if you use Google Chrome, like on your phone, and not Safari, nothing like that. Because when you use Safari or anything like that, like it just doesn't work. I don't know what's up with Safari or Windows Explorer, but it doesn't work. Google Chrome proper, it does the trick.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Could be the internet too and your location. Maybe you're out there. Man, doing these lives, you know what I mean? Doing live and direct. It's sketchy sometimes, you know what I mean? Like you got all kinds of internet issues, you got all kinds of stuff, man. I could be talking to like the King of England right now. And still you're gonna have issues. So yes, I have Douglas Bond on with me. We're talking about his books. There's a bunch of books that I have of his that I have not read to my kids yet. But we are getting there for sure. And let me know in the comments below if you have any of these books by Douglas Bond for your kids, because I will, if everything goes well. He's on. No, if he comes back on, which I think he will, I really want to get into telling stories, how to tell stories. I want to ask the biggest problem. What is the biggest problem in his mind when it comes to modern day fictional books? Like there's so much I want to address here. Let's see. All right, there you are. Hello.
Maybe that's going to be better.
Welcome
I'm
back.
closer to the server, so
Yeah, so
sorry about
we were talking
technical
about some of your
difficulties.
books.
I am certified. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm a certifiable
technical
techno moron.
difficulties
I really
happen.
should probably, yeah,
Hey man,
I should
even the
probably
best
write books
offense
with
sometimes
a
punt the
quill
ball.
pen, maybe a ham. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So, what you had a question there? You wanted, and I just coming in on the tail end
Yeah,
of it.
so like
If you could repeat the
I was
question.
looking at some of your books like King's Arrow. You wrote these like almost 20 years ago. Rebels Keep, Duncan's War, and I know
That's right.
that's like a series in itself.
Yeah.
So what encouraged you to write
Right.
some of those books? Like Duncan's
Yeah.
War
Well,
and
I
Rebels
mean,
Keep.
I am a right. Don't question. That was my actually my fifth book. The first four were a series, Mr. Pipe's series on Christian hymnody, and embedded in a contemporary story that traveled around and went to the various places where the hymn writers lived and wrote and so forth. But but Duncan's War is set in Scotland, and it's in the Covenanting lowlands of Scotland. And I had led several tours there with the school that I taught at, and since 1996. In fact, it was the first time I'd been there, and I was first time I'd led a tour there. That is, but and I was fascinated with the Covenanters in the 1600s, the 17th century Covenanters, which is sometimes called the Second Reformation. The Scottish Puritans, they're sometimes called as well, but they suffered an enormous amount, and of course they came after John Foxe and Foxe's Book of Martyrs, so they're much lesser known because they were after the Bloody Mary martyrs and all of that are recorded in Foxe's Book of Martyrs. So as I was reading, I realized that there were very few books about the Covenanters. There were some academic books that were pretty dry and turgid and not accessible to the average person and not very inspiringly written. That would capture the attention of young people, and especially young men. My mission, I have 4 sons and 2 daughters. My mission has been primarily to write books that help boys become men. We live in a world where there's a toxic war on masculinity, to borrow a recent book title, and it is so devastating to young men in our world. We're all basically tiptoeing around, wringing our hands because of some of the particular kinds of attacks in this toxic war on masculinity, and I think that we as Christian men need to nurture the next generation in biblical masculinity. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a Christian man? And so my books are really exploring that in the embedded in the story and in the characters and in the rising action. Historical fiction is woven around, usually in my case, around a climactic battle, a climactic conflict that happens, and I create a character that is lifelike and authentic and living in that time period. Oftentimes actual characters, but we don't know very much about them, and so I give them flesh and blood, and they're participants in the story, and they are my lens then to the real historical figures, the Samuel Rutherfords and the Nesbitt brothers, and all of the greats of that covenanting period of time. And so that's Duncan's War is set in the 1660s, and it is a story that about the rising pressure on Scottish Presbyterians, faithful to the Word of God, in the century after John Knox and the Reformation, who are being forced. This conflict should sound familiar to American ears, who are being forced by the Anglican Church, by the Church of England, to compeer, they called it. They were being forced to bow to bishops and to conform to the Book of Common Prayer as it had been modified by Archbishop Laud. Charles Dickens said that if Archbishop Laud had been if a madman had been let loose on Scotland, he couldn't have done more damage than Archbishop Laud did in the 17th century. And it certainly is true. It's the same exact conflict that put John Bunyan, one of my more recent historical fictions is called The Hobgoblins, and it's set in John Bunyan's Elstow and Bedford in the 17th century in his lifetime. And that's the same conflict. The reason that John Bunyan was in prison for 12 years is because he refused to take the oath as to the king as the head of the church. And he's saying, job's taken, King Jesus is already the head of the church. And that's exactly what the Covenanters were saying to the north. The difference is that in Scotland, they were hanging them and chopping their hands off, and they were engaged in
Wow.
breaking up their field meetings out. They would gather as families out in the fields, the moorlands and all, to worship instead of going to the church, because the church buildings were controlled by the King of England. And so there was a great deal of suffering for Christians, and there was a great deal for us to learn from Christians who are under persecution. We're getting there. It's coming. And
Yeah.
that's the nice thing, is if you write timeless, enduring historical fiction, it should be relevant in every age, because what goes around comes around. There's nothing new under the sun, and Christians should expect to suffer persecution if they're being faithful to the Word of God. And virtually all my books are going and looking at Christians in affliction, Christians experiencing suffering and persecution, and all of those things, and how they stand fast, how they hold fast. Two titles of my fathers and sons devotionals. How do we do that in every age? So I explore that in the course of the history and all in all my books, but certainly Duncan's War, King's Arrow, Rebel's Keep. That's called the Crown and Covenant trilogy, and it's sort of become my signature trilogy. I was being introduced to a headmaster of a classical Christian school down in Georgia a little while back, and a woman headmaster, and when she was introduced to me, she said, Duncan's War, King's Arrow, Rebel's Keep, and then she said Hostage Lands, and she started naming my books. And that's the Scotland is, I'm passionate about that. I have lots of friends in Scotland. I've been there many times. I know from your pseudonym that you're kind of a fan too of
I'm a
John
huge
Knox
fan of
there.
John
So,
Knox. I would love to talk to you about John Knox and ask you about that, because I'm listening to your the audiobook on the Thunderer. So tell me about John Knox. Like
are you okay? Good.
what made you want to write a book about John Knox, and what's so special about John Knox?
Well, I think there's a way to find out if somebody's solid or not,
Mhm.
and that is if the progressive movement in our moment, sadly, as it's filtered its way into the church and into Christian theology, if it begins to hate someone from the past, you might want to check them out. They probably got a lot of good things going for them. There's other good ways to do that too, and I just read them. Calvin is like that too. My book, The Betrayal, is all about Calvin, and said, and these were men that were so maligned and have been so maligned by the modern world. And all you have to do is open their works, their sermons, and read them, and you realize, what? Wait a sec. So for example, John Knox is considered to be a misogynist, a hater of women. And
Right, right,
so
because of that book you
feminists
wrote.
today just
Yeah, he
yeah,
wrote a
yeah,
book. Yeah, he wrote a
because
book about like,
he wrote the first blast of the
yeah, yeah,
yeah, first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous women. He was thinking of three particular women at the
yeah.
time who, in anybody's book right now, would have been considered the tyrants and just horrible murderers. It was Bloody Mary.
Bloody
She
Mary, yeah.
earned her adjective very, very well, and Queen of Scots,
Queen of
and it
Scots.
was Mary Guise, the Queen Regent, mother of Mary Queen of Scots, all of whom were uh, actually the haters of women. I've often wondered here, John Knox comes in and he is working with the believing Parliament, the Christian nobles in Scotland are begging Knox to preach and to spread the gospel and all. He was in exile in well, first chained to an oar in on a French galley, and then was finally freed. And they begged him to come on back, and so he comes on back and to Scotland, which was his heart's desire. But the Parliament passes the Scots Confession that Knox and four other men named Johns. I can imagine that. They wrote it in 4 days. Can you imagine? Pass me the inkwell, John. John. They're all named John. But Knox crafts the Scots Confession, it presents it to Parliament there, and Parliament approves this. Bear in mind, this was in a day when they weren't thinking pluralism like we think today, and of course that's worked so well for us, right?
Right.
But I'm tongue in cheek there. But
Right.
they weren't that there had to be this wall of separation between church and state, and there are obviously problems with a state church and a government. I mean, what Denmark has a state church today, and it's as secularized as it can be.
Right.
But Knox believed that the laws of God needed to be believed and practiced within the civil government of a society, and in Scotland. Obviously, he wanted to see heart conversion. He wanted to see people brought to a living faith in Christ, and their hearts transformed by the power of the gospel. But he didn't want to see false teaching inform the legal code in Scotland either. And so here we go. The man who's considered to be a hater of women by modern feminists and the evangelical feminist movement, which has done more harm and more damage to the church in recent years than probably any other movement. The other ones that are outside of the transgender and some of those, hugely problematic. But the so-called evangelical feminist movement has destroyed marriages and families by its tens of thousands. And but Knox establishes for the first time, this is the medieval coming into the Renaissance world, for the first time in the history of Europe, Knox establishes a national education system that is for everybody in Scotland, rich, poor, male, and female. That happens in Knox's Scotland under his watch.
Wow.
And I just want to confirm still connected here. I'm seeing a little different screen.
Yeah,
I see what it is. It's a
it's your
picture of the
book.
mighty weakness. I recognize it. Okay. But thanks for that, my friend. But anyway, so he establishes this, and who's it for? It's for women. For the first time in the history of the Western world, Knox wants girls, rich girls and poor girls, crofters' daughters. He wants them to go to school and to learn. And the curriculum was an English translation of Calvin's Catechism from Geneva and the Geneva Bible, with 300,000 commentary notes in the margins. So this, next time somebody says that John Knox was a misogynist, a hater of women, put it in the historical context. He was up against 3 vicious, tyrannical women, one of whom was actually executing people for breaking Lent. And in 1544, in the city of Perth, the Queen Regent had a woman, a believing, godly woman, who in her labor pains didn't pray to Mary in her labor pains. She cried out to King Jesus in her pains.
Yeah.
A beautiful baby into the world, and she was arrested and her baby taken from her. And what was her crime? Her crime was that she did not pray to Mary while she was in her labor pains, and they drowned her in the river in a dunking chair.
Oh my goodness.
This was a woman. This was a tyrant who did that. If
Wow.
you want monstrous tyrants against women, go to the Jezebels of history, and you will find they are the most monstrous in their treatment of women. Knox wanted, and the letters that Knox wrote to his mother-in-law, who was a very timorous, God-fearing sort of personality and woman, and he would write the most tender letters of encouragement to her, and placarding Jesus and the grace of the gospel for her to put her hopes in Jesus, not in her performance and all. This is a man who knew how to nurture his flock, including the women in his flock, and he loved them in Christ, and and loved all those girls that he wanted to come and study and learn to read the Word of God. And so, anyway, Knox is a great hero, much maligned. And there again, if he's much maligned by the postmodern world, he's probably our friend.
That's
And we
probably a good thing. Yeah, that's a good thing.
deeper.
Amen.
Yeah,
Telling the truth in fiction can be harder than, easier said than done.
sure. Yeah,
I really want to talk to you about this because, there's a lot of, fictional books out there.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And
yeah.
a lot of different books, tell you a different story.
That's right.
You know what I
That's right.
mean?
I
Like,
do.
oh,
Yeah,
so what are your thoughts about fiction genre? Like, you know, what is fiction? What is the goal of fiction? Like, what is supposed to do? Like, if you can just give us like a philosophical explanation for that. What is fiction first, and then like, what is the goal, and then like, how do you tell the truth in fiction?
yeah. Those are super good questions and so important. I think I've signed books at CBA. They used to have CBA, which was the trade fair for Christian publishers, and
Yes.
all these distributors, people would come to it and stuff like that. They're not doing it anymore, but I've been to a number of those, signing books on new releases and things for publishers, and I remember several times I've had sort of young seminarians. They're really into John Owen and stuff, and so am I. But they're really into heavy theology, and they've come up, and when they find out that what I'm signing, and in this row of people that are waiting in line for books I'm signing, oh, it's historical fiction, and they kind of, oh, I don't read fiction. I don't have time. I just read nonfiction. And I thought, okay, so you don't read a whole bunch of your Bible then? I mean, the greatest teller of fiction in the New Testament was a man called Jesus. Jesus was repeatedly using the genre that is my primary genre. I write nonfiction as well, but my primary genre is nonfiction, or is fiction, and I want to do it someday. I want to do it better and better every day, but someday I want to get closer and closer to doing it like Jesus did it. We have in the scriptures itself models of the power of the story, and what the story is supposed to do, and that the story is not sort of tangential to the point Jesus is making. Let me give you several examples. Big question: who is my neighbor? Right? And Jesus could have given, like you say, a technical definition of your neighbor. They have to, they live within so many hundred, blah blah blah, whatever. He could have done.
Yeah.
He could have gone down that road. Not Jesus. No, he
He
said,
could have sounded like an
his,
HOA guy, like an
yeah,
HOA
exactly,
meeting.
right. He could have done that, but no, that's not Jesus. He's not going to do that. What does he do? His immediate answer is, there was a man who went down to Jericho. He starts with a beginning exposition, and in literary language, that's a beginning exposition. He starts to lay out the who, what, when, where, of the story. And what happens? Everybody sits up and like, oh, okay, yeah, I like stories, right?
Yeah.
Not just the kids that sit up when you do that, by the way.
Yeah.
It's all of us. We like stories. Jesus knew that. Well, how do you know that? He made us. He made us in His image, and we're made with an imagination, and we're made to respond to story. And I think let's take the lens out into the wide angle here for a moment. The whole Bible is set up as a story, right? That doesn't mean it's not true. That doesn't mean it's not history. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are rock solid history. Adam and Eve are not metaphors. They were real people. If you'd had your phone there, you could have videoed them and put them on your YouTube account. Well, you wouldn't
Yeah.
want to do that. This is after the fall. But it's my point. But but this was a real story. It was happening in real time. There was a real garden. There were real trees in it. They were mature, just like Adam and Eve were made as adults. Marriageable adults. And the garden was mature. It takes a long time to mature a garden. You plant seeds, and it takes years of nurture and digging up weeds and fertilizing and all that stuff. God made a mature garden. He made mature people. He made a mature earth. And there was already soil. Soil is the decomposition of dead stuff and all that. There was soil. What else? What else are those trees growing in? I'm not going to deviate here into creation and all, but why not? That's the story of creation is set up right there, and it begins as a story. In the beginning, God. We have once upon a time, right? We're just aping our Heavenly Father. We're just imitating our Creator, who made us, wired us for stories. He wired us for imaginative stories, for imaginative literature. He wired us for poetry. How much of the Bible is poetry? I put these in the same creative writing genre here. Yeah, all of the Psalms. So much of the major and minor prophets are
Mhm.
actually poetry. And we even have snatches of poetry in the New Testament, certainly, and allusions to it, quotations from poetry, from the Psalms. Jesus was constantly quoting from the Psalms and all. And so, we as Christians should be the last people who poo-poo imaginative literature and say, it's fiction. Oh, I don't have time for fiction. Jesus,
Yeah.
just give me the spreadsheet. Can you put that in on a post-it note, Jesus? I don't want, give me a grocery list, Jesus. I don't want you to go into this long story about this guy who went down to Jericho, got beat up, and and we have to say, wait, you don't tell Jesus how his story unfolds, how the Bible unfolds, how he communicates truth to us. Jesus communicates truth through story. And so we should be people who not just to say, oh, okay, but people who actually embrace it and say, wait, my kids need the best books. You brought up the idea that there is a lot of fiction out there, and there's a lot of really bad fiction out there. C.S. Lewis says there's just two kinds of books: good ones and bad ones. The children's books and all that. We think, well, those are just for children. Well, Lewis didn't think that way. Fairy tales, those are just for children. He didn't think that way. He believed that you choose the genre that's the best genre to communicate the message that you want to get across. That's why he chose Narnia. He chose Narnia not because he just wanted to communicate with children, but because he believed it was the best genre to sort of a contemporary school story fantasy
Yeah.
to communicate the message that he was trying to communicate. What was Lewis struggling with himself? He was struggling with, he lived in a rationalist world. He was, in this supercharged academic atmosphere of all these erudite people around him, and he was one of them. And all these people that, really kind of poo-pooed children and poo-pooed children's stories. And that's one of the reasons why he was passed over for full professorship all those years there at Oxford. We can't have a guy on here who writes kids' books. How can we do that? And also who's so right about being a Christian, the real article, a Bible Christian. Ends up getting a full professorship in medieval literature in Cambridge the last 3 years of his teaching life. But anyway, they're bad. There's good ones and there's bad ones. Well, how do we discern the difference between the good ones and the bad ones? Well, the good stories are communicating truth, adorning truth.
Uh-oh. He fell off again. All right. All right. It was getting good. I gotta admit, it was getting good. So I have with me Douglas Bond. He is an author and teacher, wrote over 30 books of fiction and nonfiction, mostly nonfiction, historical fiction. Man, his understanding of John Knox is amazing. Like if you have not read that book, you could go on Reformation Heritage and go ahead and check out that book. It's not that big, but it's a great highlight. There he is. There he is. Hold on.
I'm back. Okay.
All right, you're back.
Writing blasphemous poetry, shaking his fist at the God he said didn't exist. Um, so there's sort of this embedded apologetics in the story. And what the Bible does with evil is it doesn't ever titilize us with sin. It doesn't ever make us say, "Oh, that would be cool. I'd like to go out and throw rocks at King David and mock him and all of that." And I'd like to go out and murder, commit adultery with somebody else's wife, and then murder the guy, even when he's one of my frontline guys. I'd like that sounds cool. No, the Bible never portrays evil in a tempting or a titillating light. It shows the ugliness of sin, and so must our fiction. Fiction, if it's to be telling truth, is going to show the ugliness of sin. It's going to always it's going to woo the reader from vice to virtue, as one
Mm.
16th century author put it, Sir Philip Sidney, contemporary of Shakespeare, in his defense of poesy. You want, and you don't do that. I'm not preaching sermons. I do that sometimes, but I'm not preaching sermons. You got to stick with your genre, right?
Yeah.
My genre is storytelling. Christians who write stories should write the best fiction out there. Fiction that just absolutely transforms, transports the reader into another world and into another perspective from another character that's got flesh and blood, and you start thinking about this person as a real person. Christians, have an advantage over non-Christians. Flannery O'Connor was sometimes asked, don't you think that being a Christian believer is a liability for an author? And she's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I feel sorry for my non-Christian peer authors, because they don't have the whole story. They don't have that grand, marvelous perspective that's all encompassing that we get in the Bible. They don't know the end of the story. They don't know what God is doing. God reveals in His Word so much of what He's doing, and the end goal of what He's doing in the world. And the Christian author knows that, and can and has this marvelously liberating perspective from which to write. I get goose flesh just thinking about it, and I do feel sorry for the non-Christian writers. Yeah, they might make more money than I do. J.K. Rowling makes a lot more money than I make. But but I don't envy her. I think, my goodness, I'm so thankful that I know that actually witchcraft, wizardry, and sorcery are real. They're not fantasy. They're rivetingly real stuff, and the Bible speaks about them, and it speaks in a certain way, and it makes it incumbent on us as a Christian author to write about those things in a certain way, and not in a way that in any way would make my reader be titillated toward those things as legitimate and so forth.
Should kids, read Harry Potter and that kind of genre?
Well, I would rather. I'm not in a place, I think, to pass a judgment like that, and I think I lose something when I do. I would prefer to drive them back to the Word of God and say, how does the Bible speak about witchcraft, wizardry, and sorcery? I want people not to just do something because I said they shouldn't do it or shouldn't read it or whatever.
Sure.
Who am I? But I would like to drive them back to the Word of God and say, how does the Word of God speak about those things? Every time, not most of the time. We won't even go with most of the time. 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
How does the Bible speak about those things? Does it speak? Are they entertaining? Are they sort of trivial things? They don't really matter. We can kind of laugh at them. We can kind of enjoy them and all of that. Or does it speak in a different way? I think you and I know the answer. I think any thoughtful Christian with their Bible open genuinely knows the answer to that. And so then we have to make some comparisons, and we have to make biblically informed judgments about literature that's in front of the vampire literature, whatever else is the latest thing, or explicit, sexually explicit literature and so forth. There's rape in the Bible, right? But it's never gratuitous. It never titillates you. It never makes you say, "Oh, that's cool." No, it's horrible. It's awful. It's the demeaning. It's the treating of a woman. It's a man not being masculine in a biblical sense. He's not taking his superior strength that God has given men to use to serve and to protect and to provide for women, to treat them with honor as the weaker vessel, Peter says. That's not demeaning to women to use that term. Peter didn't intend to demean women when he said they're weaker vessel. Hey, let's face it. You line up 100 women and you line up 100 men, and you accumulate the push-ups to the same standard that they can do in the next half hour, and I guarantee you that the men just taken off the street and the women just taken off the street, the men will do 80% more push-ups in the same amount of time to the same standard, probably more than that. And that's not demeaning to women. Women have strengths that men don't have. Let's be honest, okay?
Yeah, like
They have.
women deliver babies, and they have a special strength for that.
You know what? I've had some pain sometimes, and in the past, I've said, boy, I must be getting closer to what it feels like to give birth. I'm the kids, and it's like I get this look across the room like, you don't know, you don't know nothing. You wouldn't say that, but but the point being that that is an incredible gift of a particular kind of strength.
Yeah.
And then the nurturing that women are uniquely able to do, that men can nurture, and we should be nurturing. We should be constantly improving in how we nurture. But women are given a special nurturing role, even anatomically. Think about it. I have a new grandson right now. That kid, I'd love to put a picture of him up that my son just sent me. They're down in Oklahoma. They're coming up in about 2 weeks for my youngest son's wedding, but we're going salmon fishing and canoe paddling and sailing and stuff. And gonna spend some fun time together too while they're here for about 10 days. But when this kid looks so fat, he looks like a little Buddha, I mean,
little Buddha, that's funny.
That's all this blurring of male and female and the roles of men and women and how that's been torpedoed in the family and in marriage and so forth. Just so devastating, so destructive. The damage that's done. But look at it. I mean, we have things that are absolutely biologically verifiable that women can do that men can't ever do. I don't care what you say. I don't care, how many hormones you take and how much chopping off you do. You can never give birth to a baby. No man can ever do that. No man's ever going to be able to nurse a baby. It's a marvelous different way, and feminism has so torpedoed the differences, the gloriously wonderful differences between men and women. Those are marvelous. Those aren't demeaning. A Christian ethic doesn't demean women. It raises women. Why did they call Calvin's Geneva? Calvin's Geneva gets torpedoed. Why? It grew. They had a immigration problem in Geneva. It doubled in size.
Double inside, yeah. Because all the Protestants and everybody and was coming there.
They're coming. And what did it get called? It ended up being called a haven for women. A lot of people, but Geneva was called a haven for women in its own day. Why? Because there were laws against prostitution. Trafficking ends when you get into Geneva. You're not trafficking anymore. You get freedom. And wives and all were husbands were. You didn't beat your wife. You beat your wife in Geneva. You're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And there were all kinds of things that were in place that freed women back to the Geneva Bible, and Knox going back to Scotland, and girls, poor girls, rich girls, didn't matter. You got to learn to read. In the Western world, that wasn't happening, unless you were, the king's daughter or something like that, But and even then, many of them were illiterate. But no, not in Scotland, not in Knox's Scotland, not in Protestant Scotland. And the Puritans wanted education for women in England as well, and in the colonies and all too, and who were the you got me on one of my tangents here. I'm sorry. But no, I'm not sorry. I don't apologize. I think this is where the battle lines are drawn right now. We have to stand there and fight. That's where we have.
Yes.
And how do we as men do that? Oh, we enfold the women. We protect them. We love them. We honor them for their biblical beauty and the excellent wife and all of that. We celebrate women. We use our strength to protect and provide and care for women, our wives first, and our daughters, and then in our society and culture, abortion. They're aborting more baby girls than they are baby boys. They're aborting more black uh, baby girls than they are black uh, baby boys, even. So what should we be?
Wow.
Well, we should be standing and delivering against abortion. It's the great Holocaust of our day. It's throwing our children to Moloch. And men should be leading the van in that, and leading the charge in that, and not the woman that's caught in abortion. She should be enfolded. She should be warmly and lovingly brought into the church and the kingdom of God, not thrown in jail. We want to rescue her from this horrible evil in our own day, and and on it goes. Men should be uh, the most tender in their leadership and in their headship, and in the roles that God has given us, and in our strength, physical strength. I mean, it's I remember being at a Scottish Highland Games with my kids years ago with the family, and we're watching the games, and there's male and female sports, and you have to be in a kilt to be in these sports, but they're international. So you got Bulgarian women out there, with their kilt on and their muscles bulging out of their tank top, tattoos and everything. And so always in all of the sports, whether it's the sheep toss, or whether it's the caber toss, or whatever else it is, they have the female version, the male version. And and I remember we were there in Callander, Scotland, at these Callander Games, and this was the world games for Scottish Games. And so they were doing this tire toss thing too. And they take this huge industrial earth moving tire, and so they
Wow.
have a woman out there, and she's straining away on this, and she gets it over once, and then she gets it over half again, and she's straining underneath it, and she's done. Everybody claps. She's done. It's the men's turn. Guys get out there, same tire. They get out there. The first guy up gets out there, and he gets in position, and they blow the horn, and he's going down the field just how many times this guy's flipping his tire, flipping his tire, flipping his tire. They're counting as it goes, and the strongest Scottish female got it over 1.5 times. I don't remember what the guy who won. I think he got it over like 35 times.
Wow.
So, well, okay, we can fight against that. We can try to rewrite biology, physiology. We can do all kinds of crazy stuff. I just described what we're doing in our society and culture right now. None of that changes reality. It's an objectively real world, whether you like it or not. Men are physically stronger. Okay, how we're going to do that? My books, in all my books, I am trying to motivate young men to want to rise up and stand in the gap, stop the freight train for the women. I want them to rise up and take risks in the protection of women, their moms, young men, their sisters, the neighbor girl, their classmate, whatever. I want them to do that. I want them even to step up and open the door for that feminist who stands there with her arms crossed and won't go through the door. I've experienced that personally more than once. And or I step aside in the line at the bank, and the woman looks at me and like I think she's some frail little thing, No, I'm not doing this because you're a woman. I'm doing this because I'm a gentleman. I am doing it because you're a woman too. And I think that we need to recover biblical manhood, what it means to be a man. My books, embedded in all my books, I would say, is a hope, a biblical hope that we can recover for this next generation, young men who know how to be godly, strong Christian men, and be godly husbands who can be gentle and tender with their wives and honor their wives, listen to their wife where they need to. But remember too that the curse on Adam in Genesis 3, the curse starts with, because you listen to the voice of your wife. So we need to raise up young men who know when to listen to their wife tenderly, when to cover their mouth and listen to their wife. She needs you to listen right now. Okay. And when not to listen, and how not to listen, how to lead instead of listen. Abraham's going to listen to Sarah when she says, we're not having the baby. Here, take my servant, go into her and have a child by her. What does Abraham do? He listens to the voice of his wife when he shouldn't have, when he should have showed godly leadership, biblical leadership, when he should have been a man of strength and character and conviction. That's what I want my readers to come away with in my books.
Yeah, so motivational, inspirational. I want to talk about the kids' book list, if you have any.
Yeah.
If there's a bunch of kids, in my house, and then there's a bunch of kids that I know that love books, and
Kids, I love that. Kids. Yes.
and what books that you think they should definitely read
Okay.
before 12 years old?
Okay. Well, I would take you to three places where I have lists. Two. Let's start with two. They are the appendix of my book, Stand Fast in the Way of Truth and Hold Fast in a Broken World. And
Mm.
dads to read to their sons. You talk about motivational. I wrote these when now he's 30. Goodness, what is he? He's 33. Huh, I should know this. I'm a bad father. He's 33. It's so many years I can't keep track. Here, there you go. But he's 33. He's got 3 daughters. I started writing that 20 years ago when he was about 13. And the reason, he was my oldest son of 4. The reason is I wanted to be able to. You're good at that. Look at that. See, I'm a techno moron. I could, it'd taken me about 8 weeks to be able to pull that up on the screen. But I wanted to have a collection place for myself as a father. What are all the conversations I want to be having with my young teen son? Well, it got longer and longer. Pretty soon, PNR says, "You know what? We can't hand dad to read with his teen son a book that's over 550 pages long. So we got to do this in 2 volumes." So Stand Fast and Hold Fast, and and I wrote them, to be read together, with fathers and sons. And my oldest daughter now, who is she's rounding up on, she'll be 35. Goodness, in November. She wanted to read. She wanted to be the first one to read all my books when they came out as a book. I'd read many of them in manuscript form with my kids, and she said, "Well, Daddy, can I read that book?" She was in college at that time, I think, when it came out, and or maybe senior in high school, whatever. And she said, it's for dads to read with sons, but can I read it? And I said, well, yeah, you can read it. I think you're mature enough to read this and all. So she's like a pound it down reader, I mean, pretty much all my kids are, but read fast and voraciously. And we read aloud in the home, all the time. It's just what we do. I was reading aloud today. And well, of course, the Word of God, first, last, and in between. But I would read things in manuscript, kind of test them out, try them out. She came back to me, like less than a week later. She said, "Daddy, girls need to know what you're writing about in this book." and that's true. I think maybe with Dad's help and all along the way too. But so at the end of Stand Fast, at the end of Hold Fast, there is exactly what you've asked for, my friend. There is a book list, and though it's kind of designed for boys, there's Thoughts for Young Men by J.C. Ryle on it and all that. But Thoughts for Young Men is a good book for girls to read too. Here's part of my theory. I target writing for boys largely. I've just finished a manuscript here that's for husbands and wives to read together. But largely I write targeting for young men and boys, and I think that if you write for young men, girls will read them. I get more mail from readers, emails, social media, private messages, even physical mails that still comes in the mail sometimes, from girls than I do from young men. I think part of that's just the way, one of the differences between girls and boys. A girl reader, I think, is more inclined to write an author than a boy reader. I don't know for sure why, but but that's certainly in my experience that's been the case. But you write for boys, write books that are rivetingly interesting to boys, and girls will read them. If you write just for girls, guess what happens? Boys don't read them. Boys
Yeah,
aren't going
that's
to.
funny.
I mean, it's a fact. I mean, if people could say, "Well, that's a sexist fact." Well, I'm sorry. I didn't make that fact. Reality made that fact. That is true. Boys are not going to. I experienced it myself as a reader in my younger years, and and I'm a big fan of Jane Austen, by the way. I love reading Jane Austen books, and I don't. Rosemary Sutcliffe is one of my favorite authors of historical fiction, and she wrote 47 books in the 20th century, in Britain. And I'm not. I don't. I love Flannery O'Connor. I use a lot of Flannery O'Connor in my. Her book Mystery and Manners in my Oxford Creative Writing Masterclass. I don't look at the craft of writing and say, well, I'm only going to read that book because it's written by a man. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's utter ridiculous. And my reading list and the books that I have piled all over and on the walls and everywhere prove that. But I don't think I need to defend myself against that by any means. But the fact is, we do need men, Christian, godly men who are, really to write. You have to be a reader. You have to be immersed in reading, to communicate well. I think the more you read widely in literature, in historical fiction, in other forms of fiction, in poetry. The more able you are to communicate. The more tools you have in your kit, the more vocabulary you've got in your kit, to communicate with. And without that, you're hurting. A book that came out a few years back, written by T. David Gordon. I bet you've heard of it. Why Johnny Can't Read.
Yes.
And then there's a follow-up to that. Why Johnny
Can't sing.
Can't sing hymns.
Yeah.
And then Johnny Can't Preach. Actually, T. David Gordon didn't write Why Johnny Can't Read up on those titles, but he wrote Why Johnny Can't Preach. And in it, his premise in that book is this guy may have gone to seminary, he may have graduated top of his class, he may have his Greek, his Hebrew down, all that stuff, great. He may read all the right Puritans and everything, great. But if he doesn't read imaginative literature, he's stunted. He has stunted himself in being able to communicate all of that theology that he knows.
Interesting.
He can't preach to his congregation because he doesn't know how to tell stories.
One book I have right here. It's right here. It's a pretty big book, but it's broken up into short stories. It's called The Book of Virtues.
Oh yeah.
And I let it collect dust, but I picked it up recently and I started reading, and I was like, wow, like it's a bunch of short stories.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I learned so much about it. I read this one about honesty, about the emperor and the seed.
Yeah.
And I was blown away. I was like, wow, that's a cool story. There's a bunch of stories that I was like, the boy who cried wolf. You know what I mean? Stuff that we've heard.
Aesop's fables, yeah.
Yeah.
And those used to be part of just the bedrock of every child's growing up was these stories from the Middle Ages and from Greek mythology and all of that were just part of Western civilization.
So what happened? Why did education move away from fables and Peter Rabbits and all these virtuous stories?
That is such an important question. What happened is called postmodernity. we set our sights on dismantling Western civilization several decades ago in our education system, in our curriculum, in the public arena, and when we began to attack dead white male authors.
That sounds like it's self-destructive. Like, why would we want to destroy ourselves?
Yeah, And that, well, look at where we are. It has been self-destructive, and we are the living proof of that right now as a culture. We can't even define what a well, better yet, let's get the whole enchilada. A Supreme Court justice can't even define what a woman is because she's not a biologist. You know,
Wow.
oh, what a dog is, and I'm not a veterinarian. I mean, it's just absurd, the kinds of conversations that we're having, as if they are serious conversations in our world today, and yet they are. And the Christian needs to be able to stand and deliver to those things. But the problem is, we've lost all this social capital, this cultural capital that used to be just part of basic, a McGuffey reader. That was
Yeah.
just what everybody knew and everybody grew up with. And a lot of other cultures, around the world, and different ethnic groups and all, have retained some of their cultural story. But
Sure.
we very intentionally, in the Western world, have dismantled it. We have torpedoed it. We've villainized it. And so we don't know how to write a story. We don't know how to communicate a story, and and we don't know basic virtues that used to be just part of the fabric of family, and neighborhood, and the town and the community. This is one of the reasons why right now there's been a lot of discussion about, and even in pop music, about small town values. you know I mean, we can idealize that. We can have the agrarian myth too, and think, well, if we all just went back to the land, everything would be fine. Well, there's a thing out there that's a problem for that, and it's called total depravity. Not everything is fine. Nobody gets to heaven just because they grew up on a farm, or because they grew up in a town of 1,000 people instead of a metropolis like New York City. Nobody gets to heaven for that. But there are certain things in a small community. I live in a small community that are, people watch out for each other a lot more in a small community. My
Yeah.
dog is loose, and my neighbors, they bring Indy back, and he's
Yeah.
visiting, and stuff. It's just there's more of a cooperative sense. We're watching each other's mailboxes. If somebody's
Sure.
mail,
Yeah.
somebody's driving down the dead end road that we live on, that we haven't seen that car before, and they're pulling in a neighbor's driveway. Yeah, I'm packing side. I got a sidearm on already. I'm gonna go over there and meet this guy with my dog. And why? Because we're neighborhood. We watch
Yeah.
out for each other, and they're going to do the same thing for us too. And I think those are things that we've really just lost those things. That's why there's so many YouTube videos of people getting beat up in New York City or in LA or
Mm.
Francisco,
Mm.
and you pause after a little bit and you say, what's the guy doing who's holding his camera videoing that?
Yeah.
Why drop his camera and go in there and rescue this, the elderly lady who's getting flogged with her own cane? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's going on? Something is missing in society, and it's on multiple fronts. The guy's afraid of interfering because the guy might hurt him, and he might go to jail for interfering too, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
and so there's all, so much for the Good Samaritan law.
Yeah.
People are afraid.
Look what they did to Kyle Rittenhouse, where he's like, I need to go defend people, and then look what they did to him. He's a kid.
Yeah, he's a kid, 17-year-old kid.
Yeah, and he
Gets
went through
vilified.
hell,
Oh yeah,
just for protecting, a few
right.
people that told him to. So, okay, I like to read, and I read out loud. Me and my wife, we read out loud, and but I think earlier we mentioned something about persecution and tyranny, because we were talking about John Knox.
Yeah,
And there's this one of my favorite books. It's called 1984, and it's one of the top fiction books of all time in the
great,
modern sense. So
great book.
it is 1984 fiction,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
like
futuristic fiction. Really, it's almost dystopian. I mean, but the thing is it fiction, or is maybe that's what you're getting at. Or it's
yeah.
prophecy.
It,
It's prophecy. I think it's. I mean, this is where we are now, isn't it? 1984, we used to think, oh, it could never be that bad, right? Now it's way worse than that. What's going on? No, good,
yeah.
good
He,
point.
he he I think he wrote it in 1939,
Yeah.
And there was like a lot of fuss about it. It became pretty popular, and then like now it's like, well, actually, it's kind of like a blueprint. Like it worked his way out like a blueprint. And
Right.
you go to China, and there's like there's more cameras
Yeah.
than people, right? And you go to Israel, and like they're basically wiretapping every phone call there is in the country.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So like in the United States, there's so many like individual private rights, civil liberties, and all that being infringed on. And you know what I mean? The no knock, the FBI could show up to your house and take you in the middle of the night, and that's like the
You're guilty,
Patriot Act.
proven innocent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's the Patriot Act, so
Yeah.
we could
No.
make you disappear,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we've made the mistake in America, I think, of hiding behind our our Constitution. As Christians, we thought, well, we've got our First Amendment, everything's gonna be fine. We got our religious liberties, we got our guns, we got our Second Amendment, all that. And lo and behold, what goes around comes around. Why were we founded in the first place? People were fleeing tyranny and oppression, religious oppression in England, and in other countries as well that have come to have freedom of worship here in America. And lo and behold, call it a pandemic, whatever excuse you can trump up for it, you end up with a loss of liberties. And I really bless those pastors that looked around and said, you know what, we're just not going to bow to Caesar here. You know, this isn't Caesar's territory. He's out of his sphere of sovereignty, and this is King Jesus rules here, and he calls us to worship him. He calls us to sing loudly, and
Yeah.
he calls us to fellowship together, and he calls us to share the Lord's Supper together. Oh, contagion! We might get COVID was real. I got a really bad case. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and it was touch and go there for a while, and so it's a real deal. But and I didn't get the vax, and I'm glad I didn't. And I know people that did get the vax. They've had it 3 times now. It's just I think that there was a lot, not to get overly political here, but that was used as a weapon to take away liberties, and the church suffered for it hugely. And I think it showed, it sort of revealed some of the cracks in the wall that were going on. So many people went to live stream and have not come back to church now. They really don't
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
to gather the gathering of the saints. So much the more as you see the day approaching. I mean, if we don't see the day approaching, we should be gathering more and not less. And yeah, sure, we can take precautions. And Luther writes about, when plague was going through Wittenberg, they, yeah, do your best, that you can, but I'm going to be preaching in the pulpit there at the Stadtkirche. I hope to see you there. They're
Yeah.
we're still gonna gather in
Yeah.
the name of Christ to worship Him and lift His name high. And I think there's prudence and needed, and some of our more vulnerable with comorbidities, we need to take special precautions to protect their health. But at the same time, we don't go around wearing a diaper on our face that doesn't do any good whatsoever. It even said so on the 50 pack that we got them in. If it doesn't keep out the dust when I'm sanding, restoring a canoe, well, it's probably not going to keep out these tiny particles, sub microscopic particles, that are the virus. I think.
I got a question from one of the audience, and it says, "Is it okay for Christians to read secular books and find value in them?"
Oh, very good question. Bravo. I think that I was hesitant to say earlier a yes or no on a particular author in a particular series, largely because I want to encourage um, biblically informed discernment, and so I would go there as well. in the first part of my answer to this, I would say, well, who we know that Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, for example, they were masters. They were literary scholars. They were masters of the language and literature of the ancient Near Eastern world that they lived in, and they had mastered it. And the Babylonian poetry, they had it down. They
Yeah.
knew, and that meant they could recite it. They had memorized it and all. They knew it, and I think there's something very important for us there. Let's take in the New Testament. Paul goes to Mars Hill in Athens. Right, and he's looking around at all of these shrines to these
Yeah.
all pagan gods. This
Yeah.
polytheism of the ancient Greek world, and there's Zeus and Aphrodite and all that stuff, and he looks, and they've got they're hedging their bets. Here's a tomb, here's a shrine to the unknown god. If we miss them, and so he fills in the gaps here. He says, what you worship in ignorance, I proclaim to you, today, and in the course of doing so, he recites their poets to them. Paul knew Greek poetry. I taught literature for many years, literature and writing in a classical Christian school. And guess what? We studied Sophocles, we studied Oedipus the King, we studied, Antigone, and we learned, Odysseus, and all of the Iliad and the Odyssey and all that stuff. We studied all that poetry. Why'd we do that? Well, because in the providence of God, God in his, sometimes we call it common grace, he gifts, guys like Homer, the blind Maimonides, to be able to explore the human condition in particularly wonderful ways. Listen, when I get, I'm healthy right now. I'm very thankful for that. I'm not taking any medications. I take my fish oil, my CoQ10, and that stuff. I
The
take my,
basics.
yeah, the basics, vitamins and supplements and stuff like that. And and I exercise and I try to eat the right things and all that. But thanks be to God, I'm not sick right now. But if I needed open heart surgery, I wouldn't look around and I wouldn't say, well, I want a Christian heart surgeon only. I'd say, you know what? I want the best, most skillful heart surgeon. That's who I'd like to cut me open, and do the deed on me. I think that what we're looking for is, if you need an attorney, well, I really like to have a Christian attorney, but I also want a guy who's, really skillful, knows the law. He knows the ins and outs of the law, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that what we're really particularly interested in? When I, on the family farm, when it's time to slaughter a cow, to slaughter a steer or something, I want to bring out the guy who's, it'd be nice if he's a Christian. I want him. If he's not, I can help with that. Well, he's cutting my animal open. I can talk to him about Jesus. But I want the guy that's skillful at this. He gives me the best value at the best, and does it skillfully. And my meat doesn't get rancid as he's taking it to my butcher, who happens to be a Christian. The slaughterhouse, not the slaughterhouse, but meat packing place, longtime friend of mine. But in so many areas, we want skillful guy, the guy that engineers the bridge, or that engineers the airplane I'm flying in when I'm heading off to Rome, to lead one of my church history tours. I want the aeronautics engineer. My first question is not going to be, are you a Christian? Now, evangelistically, I'll get to that, but my first question is, what, in your aeronautics engineering degree, where did you rank in your class? That's
Yeah.
what I know.
It's like dead last.
Yeah, exactly. Very much. I'm going to fly with a different airline. You see my point. I think I'm making my point here. God gifts people in particular ways to be able to do particular things well, and we as Christians should celebrate that. The chef that's really good at making the kind of food I like to eat. I want to share Jesus with him. I want him to ask questions when he sees me praying before the meal and the family and the stuff there. That's great. But I want him to be a really good chef. I want him to prepare food well, right?
Yeah.
Addition, I love it when there's a Christopher Parkening, who's a Christian, who is one of the best classical guitarists around. Segovia was one of my favorites, and there's lots of other great ones. Anna Vidovic, you know, she's Croatian and all. You know, I don't really care whether they're male or female or what their ethnicity is. I want them to play the classical guitar really well for me. You know, when I bring it up on, you know, to listen to on my YouTube channel. You know, and so the point I'm making is that Christians of all people should say, wow, God is the one that made us with an imagination, gifted us to tell stories, to write poetry and all that. We should appreciate that gift wherever it appears, you know. And this crosses the gender and the ethnic, the racial. I don't like the word racial, by the way. It's ethnicities. You know, there's only one race, the human race. You know, there's different ethnicities. You know, well, we should be able to celebrate and appreciate poetry written by women, written by men, written by a Croatian, a Russian, a Ukrainian, or a black man, a Hispanic. It doesn't matter. I want to learn to appreciate that poetry, that music, that song. You know, I'm only going to listen to, you know, I think this is one of the problems with Christian music is that we've actually said, well, I'm only going to listen to Christian words. You know, I'm only going to listen to Christian music. Well, some Christian music's really lousy. In the last generation, there's been some really, really lousy music that we listened to and that got, you know, played on the radio because Christians wrote it, but it wasn't really very good.
Yeah, no. Bach was a better Christian musician than most Christian musicians today.
Kablam! You know, I agree entirely. And there's just, I think that we as Christians, I think the Bible obligates us, it enjoins us to appreciate the grace of God wherever it appears, the gifts of God wherever they appear. And so I guess this is my long answer to that question.
I like it. I like long answers.
Answer is, of course we should read books written by people if they're good books, you know?
Yeah.
And again, how do we define good books? You know, if they celebrate sin, well, we may want to reconsider that. You know, if they raise questions in our mind about the nature of humanity, if they have searching, going really deep into the psychology of their characters, so that we go there and we really begin to think deeply about the human condition. Then whether they were a Christian or not a Christian, I want to read that book because I want to go deeply into the psychology of the human condition. And if an unbeliever helps me with that in their book or in their poetry or in their epic poem or their drama, their play or their music, I want to go there, you know. And my son powerlifts, he's getting married in 2 weeks here, when he was powerlifting, when the pandemic hit, everything shut down. You know, all the gyms are shut down. You know, well, I said, well, Giles, listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to Giles, as in St. Giles, High Kirk, Edinburgh, Knox's church. My son's name is Giles Rutherford Bond. There you
go. There it is.
Yeah, there you go. Kablam. You know, but anyway, I said, well, Giles, listen, you got all these buddies that you powerlifted with that they can't go to high school gym or to the Y. You know, he was homeschooled, but he was doing NJROTC at the high school and stuff, and also doing sports there. So he was doing crew and rugby and stuff like that. They shut all that down, which is so crazy.
Yeah.
Teenage males, you know what? They need to be doing this stuff. They need to be sweating, lots of sweating, you know? And, I had a farm, so I could put them to work unloading, haylage and stuff like that too, and wrangling calves. But, so what I did was I took part of a barn and I said, okay, let's go online. We're going to buy a bunch of free weights. We're going to build a rack here, you know, with 4x4s and stuff and really get it sturdy. And then I said, and then bring in your buddies. I called them my lifting lads. And so we opened up, you know, it's COVID, but they're all showing up at my farm, you know, and they're lifting. Well, lo and behold, I'm hearing this widely eclectic music. Sometimes they're playing Tchaikovsky, sometimes they're playing Johnny Cash, and sometimes they're playing Iron Maiden, you know, while they're And so then Giles and I started, you know, we would live, you know, this wasn't appreciated by the whole household, but but Giles and I would watch the YouTube videos of Iron Maiden with just the lyrics up on screen. And we do this after family worship when other and we listen and watch that, and I'd say, Johns, where are they getting that? Well, and he says, well, that sounds like what we just read in Revelation yesterday, you know. And I said, yeah. I said, I don't know where these guys are, but I do, you know, now, but I can tell you when they wrote those lyrics, they were very possibly on a good trajectory. They were searching for something. They were trying to find something in those lyrics. It's pounding music. I mean, it's never going to be a genre. When I lift weights, I don't want to listen to that stuff. But you know, but you want to listen and look at that and say, wait a second, there's somebody who is asking the right questions. They're searching for something, and
And sometimes God has enough grace on them to, to lead them all the way to salvation, like
right,
Alice Cooper. I think he used to be an old time rocker, and
yeah,
he has, he partied, he did the whole rock band thing,
yeah, yeah,
and he lived the rock style life for a long time, and then he met Jesus, right? And then he came to Christ, and
no,
he's always sharing his testimony. He's like,
sure,
he's
no,
really, he's in his old age, and you know what I mean, but like he's sober now. He goes to church. He does a lot. He sacrificed so much for Christ, and he's got so much flack
yeah,
for his statements about Christ in the Bible, and it is pretty basic Christianity. It's like, wow,
yeah,
so that's one example of a
yeah.
former rocker, right?
And we sometimes just write them off because of what they look like and all that,
Right.
you know. And again, I think there is a mistake that we can make. We can swing the pendulum and say, well, come as you are, stay as you are, you know. Well, in fact, when you come as you are to Christ, when you're brought as you are to Christ, more accurately biblically, you're brought to Christ. Guess what? The grace of the gospel regenerates you and justifies you, and it also sanctifies you, and you don't stay as you are, you know. And Jesus, Jesus loves the elect too well to leave them as they are, because sanctification is good for us. It's a process. It's painful at times. Oh my goodness, it's painful, but it's good for us because it tears us away from the sin that so easily entangles us. We don't want to be entangled in that sin. We want freedom from that sin, and God's sanctifying work goes along with his justifying work. And I think there is that swing of the pendulum which says, oh, come as you are, stay, you know, be cool, be a hipster, be, you know, and just stay, you know, the way you are.
Yeah.
And, you know, continue to talk like, walk like, look like the world, and all will be well. Well, I think that actually what happens is you don't want to talk like, walk like, look like the world anymore, you know. And I'm not going to give a formula for that. That's not going to look the same for everybody, sound the same for everybody. But there's going to be and it's not going to be at the same pace for everybody, at the same rate. And so, what does the Christian who's saved by grace and growing in grace do? Well, they extend the widest embracing grace to their neighbor, to the new Christian who's still struggling and trying to figure out how they're supposed to dress for church, you know, stuff like that. You know, we don't go up and tut tut and wag our finger at them and so forth. We love them, and we want to bring them along. We recognize that we're not all at the same place in growing in grace and the knowledge of Christ. Just finished Second Peter, uh, and um, just this morning. And you know, we're not all at the same pace, so we extend grace, the grace we've received, to others, you know. And anyway, I think that, yeah. So maybe a
What?
tangent. I don't know.
No, I love it. I love it.
Oh, my plug.
It's the kind of after dinner conversations I want to have, right? And
I like the way
when
you named that, because that's what happens, you know, at after dinner conversation. I'm talking too much for an after dinner conversation. I need to listen. All right.
No, I love it. And so for the homeschooling mom or the homeschooling household, how can they use your books? What is your encouragement to the homeschoolers?
Yeah.
And for the skeptics out there that are saying, you know what, homeschooling
Yeah.
is just
Well,
is it's
yeah,
fake,
that's
I
such a good
guess.
question, and and it gets to the third place that you can find the book list. So this is all dovetailing here. So if you go back to where you've been putting that thing up on the screen there on the books part of my bondbooks.net site, if you go there and you look at, if you click on where it says timeline to where my books fit in the timeline of history, that should be a category there on the on my books page there. What will pop up, and it's free. You can just copy paste it or download it for a penny. My 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 website provider doesn't let you sell anything for free on there. You have to charge a penny for it. So I have it there, and you can actually just highlight, cut, and paste it. But it's it goes through all of my books and where they actually fit in the timeline of history, including Job's the God's servant Job and God's servant Ruth, where they fit in the actual historical timeline, BC, and and then right up we've talked about the 17th century in Scotland.
Yeah.
And so if you go to bondbooks.net and then you click on books, all my books are available on my website, and they're signed and free domestic shipping if you buy 2 books or more on the site. That's pretty much an ongoing thing. So 2 ways, and there at my site you have the timeline, which has the master list of all the books, but it also it has them in the timeline of where they fit in church history, which can be really helpful, like in unit studies when you're teaching history and so forth. and then they also on the site, and you can actually see in the categories part. I see where you are there. In the categories over on the left side, you have study guides, and if you click,
Okay.
you can go to and they're pretty minimal fee PDF. You can download them right then and print them out.
Yeah, the curriculum. I see the curriculum.
Exactly. So
Oh, wow.
all of the Crown and Covenant trilogy, there's 129 pages of study guide curriculum that goes with that. Cross-reference readings to letters from Samuel Rutherford and other readings from Rutherford with study guide questions, map work in Scotland, to find out where the key places are that happen in the stories and stuff, and as well as study guide questions on a variety of levels, knowledge comprehension questions, who did what, when, where, and so forth, right up to essay questions and even research topics and all. And so that's available. And this fall, it's a good time to be hitting those things. I've been getting orders from those, and the nice thing is those aren't even orders. You can click on it, and the PDF comes up right there, and you you download the PDF. But and then well, I mentioned War in the Wasteland. That's actually the curriculum for that. I see as sort of a miniature curriculum, apologetics curriculum too, because in the rising action of the story, where Lewis gets the $1 million wound, actually April 15th, 1918, he's orders to combat because he's badly enough wounded, but he has all of his arms and legs and parts and his mind. But the study guide for that is goes into other readings of C.S. Lewis, like from Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity, and some of his other apologetics readings, and then study guide questions for the teenager who might be reading that in homeschool. I'm torn writing curriculum for my fiction because I want your kids to read the books because they're good books, because they've just thoroughly gotten buried in the books, and they've destroyed more batteries, on their flashlight, under the sheets. I used to do that when I was a kid. Of course, now you just use your phone, right? But that is if you're not like me. My kids always had to turn in their device in the kitchen nook for the night. I couldn't take it to their room, but once they were old enough to have a device, but which I'm not sure if they ever are old enough to have a device. I think we'd probably be a lot better off without these things in the end. I don't know. Where's my hammer and chisel, and the stone to write books? But anyway, so there's a couple things there, those study guides as well, and then also on the site there is there's my speaking schedule that you can go to, and that links up with a bunch of audio. I've been on a lot of Christian radio programs and also lots of other podcasts. You wouldn't know it by how badly I did on linking up with your Your way to. I really bungled that. I apologize for that. But then I've got lots, just like conference. I've spoken at several Ligonier conferences and other conferences and churches. I've done Reformation conferences for and stuff. So that's all that audio is there too for people to listen to, and some of it is writing tutorials and stuff like that too. So
Yeah.
moms and dads can use in their homeschool if they're going to write, teach the kids how to write iambic pentameter. Well, you can go to my site. I've got tutorials, audio tutorials on how to write, in iambic pentameter. So there is quite a bit of resource there. So I invite your listeners to browse and go to that and then subscribe to the site too. There's a few bennies if they do that too. But, so yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. But,
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put that resource out there for everybody.
yeah, yeah, and I got to follow you and subscribe to your podcast. So that's going to pop up in the morning when I'm listening to the briefing and to World Never Minute and
Yeah.
you know
It's not much political. Like there's been a couple episodes on my live streams where I cover like what's trending in the
yeah
church kind of thing,
yeah
and I give like a reform biblical response to it,
yeah
but it gets kind of like too much negativity, too
yeah
much
exactly. I think we should come at that from the positive side. Yeah,
so like I try not to do those as often because it's like I try to like that's why I switched my whole ethos on I'm just gonna have conversations like I would in real life, you know what I mean?
sure. Yeah,
um
yeah. You have a
and
guest over and you after dinner you sit and you visit and you talk about it.
yeah, exactly. And people would catch these breadcrumbs, as I would call them.
Yeah,
Hopefully in the future they'll be like, oh, like I want to listen to what Douglas Bond has to say, and then like they'll listen to this conversation on the replay, and they'll find out things about you, and then they'll be like, that's exactly what I was thinking, like, wow, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
that's one of my goals for people after this series is over. But definitely I think this has been a blessing. I do have one question for you after offline,
Okay.
but other than that, you have any other last words? I guess any highlights you want to bring
Well,
up?
I would say to parents of children, younger readers, my newest book, God's Servant Ruth. I really enjoyed writing that, and both Ruth and Job, they go together, and they both suffered a lot. Naomi suffered a lot in that story, and she lost her husband, she lost her sons, she's in a foreign land, she doesn't have anything to eat. I mean, she's got all kinds of stuff, and that's there's a lot of suffering in our world today, and sometimes people think, well, maybe these are too heavy of themes for read alouds for young children. I just read it aloud to my great nephew who's 3, and he sat through the whole thing looking at the pictures, and my mom who's 86 was taking pictures of him while I was reading to him. And I don't know, the Bible's full of, there's no Junior Salter, is there? And 40% of the Psalms are lament. There's a lot of sadness out there, and I think we want kids to be able to laugh and joy, and our chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. um, and I think that there's joy comes out of some of the profundities in life, some of the deep stuff in life. And we can't really get to the true joy unless we pass through some of the deep heavy stuff. So you know that book is and the illustrations, the illustrators of both those books, it's a father and daughter, by the way. Brilliant, wonderful stuff. And I think it's probably better than the lyrics in there. I don't know, but they're written in poetry. Children love the cadence, the meter, the rhyming of poetry. And that's available, and it's on sale right now too, and I'm signing those books and getting those out to new readers at free domestic shipping as well. So that's hot off the press, and more coming with that. And if they like that, they need to put a bug in PNR's ear. Contract with me for the next one in that series. And we're busy on a couple other books with PNR right now too. So good publisher.
Amen. Yep. Let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and drop those links on my Twitter feed as well for those people looking for that.
Right.
Anyways, you guys know where to support me at. Go ahead and visit my website at chicanonox.com. And then as well, you could visit my store. Winter is coming, and I advise everyone to go ahead in my store and buy a sweater because you're going to need a hoodie to protect yourself this winter to stay warm. And if you don't, you probably will freeze. You don't want to freeze. Freezing is bad. And, you don't want to lose a limb for frostbite. And for those in Florida, yes, you still need a sweater. So go ahead and get your little your cell phone, hit that QR code right there, and buy yourself a sweater and stickers and coffee mugs, whatever. It's great, and plus it helps me out. Buy me a coffee, couple bucks as well. I love coffee, so support my addiction of coffee, and it helps the show out too. So
Good.
anyways, until then, thank you so much for joining the special series After Dinner Party. Leave your comments below. Replay gang, go ahead and comment down below. And until next time, I would love to, fellowship with you another time on another episode, Mr. Bond.
So,
And
enjoyed
for
it.
those first time listeners, watchers, whatever, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. God bless.